as one of the largest and most influential electronic and video game companies in the world. These guys have a long and rich history that should prove fascinating to anyone interested in the history of video games. Welcome to MojoPlays, and welcome to part 1 of our history of Nintendo! Woohoo! Before we begin, we publish new content all week long, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. While most video game companies weren't founded until the rise of electronics in the 1980s, Nintendo was founded almost an entire century earlier. In 1889, Fusajiro Yamauchi opened Nintendo Koppai, a small Japanese company dedicated to the production of Hanafuda cards. These cards function similarly to a common deck of 52 normal playing cards, and they were used to play multiple games. These handmade cards quickly gained popularity in Japan, and upon becoming the first company to produce playing cards out of plastic, the company began to completely dominate the industry. In 1949, Yamauchi's grandson Hiroshi took over as president of Nintendo. Although the company continued to enjoy a wealth of success in Japan, Hiroshi doubted the longevity of their current business model. In response to this, Hiroshi met with the American company Disney in 1959 and struck a deal that allowed Nintendo to print Disney characters on its cards. This was a pivotal moment in the history of Nintendo, as this initiative shifted Nintendo's core demographic from gambling adults to young children in search of entertainment. Nintendo seized this opportunity by producing books that taught these children how to play a variety of games with these cards. These initiatives proved to be so successful that the company decided to go public in 1962, which allowed Nintendo to invest in more unorthodox areas of business for a gaming company. These areas included a taxi company, a love hotel chain, a food company, and even vacuum cleaners.
何するんですか？いや、最近ね、ちょっとこれにハマってましてね。いや、おバキュームよくできてますね。便利なんですよ、これ。
As one could probably guess, these initiatives were less successful than previous business ventures. And with the playing card industry reaching its tipping point in the 1960s, Nintendo needed to focus on new areas in which to expand their business. In 1970, while touring one of Nintendo's factories, Hiroshi noticed a maintenance engineer named Gunpei Yokoi playing with an extending arm that he'd made himself. Hiroshi saw this as a unique opportunity and decided to begin selling this device, known as the Ultra Hand. This electronic toy proved to be immensely popular, selling more than 1 million total units. This began a lucrative period in which Nintendo, and Yokoi in particular, produced a variety of electronic toys that excited consumers and boosted profits. Dabbling in electronic toys proved the perfect segue for Nintendo to enter the new and growing video gaming industry. There were a few missteps, such as the laser clay shooting system in '73, which almost sank the company due to its high manufacturing and maintenance costs. Though one of their first successful ventures in the video gaming industry saw them secure the rights to sell the Magnavox Odyssey in Japan, the success of this venture led Nintendo to begin developing their own games. In 1975, Nintendo released their first ever arcade game called EVR Race, a horse racing game where up to 4 players could bet on a winning horse from pre-recorded footage. From there, Nintendo created a series of arcade games, with Wild Gunman being a particular standout, though their biggest breakout hit came with a little game known as Donkey Kong in 1981. The success of Donkey Kong led to its distribution within Japanese arcades, as well as ports on home consoles including the Atari 2600 and Intellivision. Around the same time, Gunpei Yokoi had developed and launched a new line of handheld gaming products called Game & Watch, which also saw major success, thanks to Yokoi gaining inspiration from seeing people only being able to use calculators on a train. Though these initiatives were extremely successful, Nintendo thought that creating their own platform on which to release their games would be a much more lucrative and sustainable business model. In 1983, the company released their first console known as Famicom in Japan. However, it had a disastrous launch, as an influx of complaints about the system's performance led to the discovery that these consoles contained a faulty chip, resulting in a recall of all shelved consoles, in turn costing Nintendo a fortune. However, Nintendo software engineers worked hard to correct the issues found in the original Famicom, and the system would later go on to be a major success in Japan. But around the same time, Nintendo was also hoping to expand into the North American market where the video game industry had all but crashed that same year. After negotiations with Atari to distribute the console in the United States fell through, Nintendo decided to go at it on their own and released the American version of the Famicom, known as the Nintendo Entertainment System or NES, in 1985. In order to prevent another crash due to an oversaturated market, Nintendo also placed a limit on the number of games that outside developers could make for the console every year. The success of the NES led Nintendo to begin testing the viability of the NES in the American market, and consumers flocked to this wonder of entertainment that would release staples of the gaming industry, including Metroid, Super Mario Bros., and The Legend of Zelda, before the end of the 1980s. The overwhelming success of the NES led Nintendo to quickly begin developing other consoles, and in 1989, the handheld console, the Game Boy, was released. This console sold extremely well given its price, durability, and battery life, not to mention the popularity of its bundled game, Tetris. As a result, it sold over 64 million units in its lifespan. Nintendo also built on the success of the 8-bit Famicom and NES by releasing the 16-bit Super Famicom and Super NES in Japan and the US respectively in 1990 and 91. Both of these consoles introduced a variety of technical upgrades, as well as the modern version of the console controller, which has 4 face buttons, 2 shoulder buttons, and rounded edges. Unlike the NES, however, it wasn't a one-horse race for the SNES. Another video game company known as Sega soon began to give Nintendo a run for their money. With the introduction of the Sega Genesis and popular titles like Sonic the Hedgehog, Nintendo's firm grip on the market began to slip, as their market share declined from 90% to 35% when going head-to-head with the Sega Genesis. These two companies would battle for control of the market for years to come. But Nintendo titles like Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country, and Final Fantasy ultimately made the Super NES the more successful console worldwide, finishing with a total of 49 million units by the end of its lifespan. Come back next week for part 2, as we take a look at Nintendo's jump into the third dimension and the challenges they faced as two of the biggest tech companies threw their hats into the gaming ring. Woo! Here we go! Thanks for watching Mojo Plays. Be sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and check out our suggestion page in the description below.